Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to Live Before Lock, represented by Awesemo.com. Sponsored the show, No House Advantage. Thank you guys for joining us after your master sweat to build some NFL lineups. Got a good game brewing here between the Colts and the Titans. Joined today by Kyle Dvorchak. Kyle, how you doing, man?
Not bad. Yeah, it's been, did it get delayed at the Masters or something? I was loosely following. I don't really follow golf, but we had some awesome content. So I still tuned into our content just to get a little bit of a sweat down on this. I have no clue how it's actually been going though, because I don't know anything about golf.
Yeah, it was, it took a while to get going because of the rain. And if people watching played any Bryson DeChambeau, a little bit of a hype play this week. Slow start to the tournament. Still got 3 days left though, so anything can happen. But that's why we're here. We wanna get a better sweat in, and when you get your money within 3 hours instead of 96, then I think that's a little bit more exciting. We got this interesting game between the Titans and Colts, both of whom run a pretty deep rotation, I would say. So this will be a good one. Now we're coming off a really surprising one between New England and New York Jets, that the Jets put up a pretty big fight, but in the end, the Patriots were able to take it down. Brashad Perryman led the scoring. So that was a big surprise. So what did you learn from Monday night's game?
So Monday night's game, we've had a slew of interesting showdown slates, because I feel like to start the year, we had, I don't even know if you'd call it chalk, but just players we had all heard of were just kind of jamming it in. Running backs were doing well. Everything was going as normal, and including Brashad Perriman and Jacoby Myers going off. Before that, we had, was it Suckup, who was the optimal play at captain a few weeks ago. Eagles defense and Saints defense both were incredible plays. The Saints defense got screwed by Tampa Bay, purposely, only exclusively playing to not get zero, not making optimal decisions. The game was over, so do whatever you want. But yeah, I think maybe it's just more interesting to look for these spots where people are potentially overvaluing what we know. And we have that spot tonight where it's hard to say we know much with certainty with this, basically completely inconsistent Indianapolis rotation. And on the other side, even the boss that we thought Derrick Henry was, Jeremy McNichols and Deonta Foreman getting involved. So maybe just potentially exploiting what people are going to be overconfident in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on Monday, Joe Flacco, the least sexy pick, but then he goes out and he throws for a ridiculous amount of yards, gets some touchdowns. And I know there's some picks tonight that are definitely not sexy, especially on the Colts side. We'll get into that in a little bit. But first, guys, if you can hit the like button, we appreciate that greatly. It gives us that positive feedback we need to really give you our best picks here. So hit that thumbs up. And all of our content on the site is under the Awesemo Express membership for Showdown. It's $3.95 a week, and you get projections, you get our Showdown ownership, and you got the top Showdown players tool in addition to the rankings, which are actually free tonight. So even if you're not a member, make sure to check out those rankings. Let's talk about the Colts first. So T.Y. Hilton is back tonight. He's been having a really rough season. I think the last game was probably the lowest point, because he only made it through half the game before getting ruled out for the rest of it. So that was very disappointing. In the end, if you've rostered him every single week, you've lost money. And the underlying numbers haven't been bad though. So he's been targeted on 18% of routes he's run. That's not great. It's average, but it's not something we should be scared of, given that he's playing 90+% of snaps when he's been active. He's averaging 11 yards per catch, catching about 60% of passes. Again, nothing that is going to light up a scoreboard, but not horrible. So I think he's just an average play, and that's good enough for me tonight to take some shots. So what do you make of Hilton?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you called him an average play. I was like, I don't know, I kind of like him, but I guess he's an average play on a slate with like a lots of average or below average. So in the context of this slate, yeah, and like the underlying numbers are not bad. Like a game of 9 targets, a game of 10 targets, and I think he's gonna be maybe under owned given that he's coming off like back-to-back truly abysmal games, 3 catches for 20 yards in back-to-back games total, not actually back-to-back games, that's total. And one of those games, yeah, he did leave, but I believe it was a groin injury, which he's now coming back from. So I think the underlying volume, like, maybe he's old and dusty and just can't get it done even on that volume. But like, how confident can I be in that? Not like incredibly confident. I'm gonna buy the underlying volume. He's a guy who's had explosive games in the past. Is that entirely gone? I don't think so. I think guys who generally get the ball a decent amount, or at least his team tries to get him the ball, it doesn't bring down many of his targets. That is somewhat of an indicator of talent. It takes something to get on the field to draw, targets versus coverage and beat out your like fellow receivers to get those targets. So if he's going to get the volume, I like him. I'm not absolutely in love with him, but I do think he could maybe be overlooked because people just think he's completely washed. He's probably only like 90% washed.
Yeah, I'll point out a couple things. Yeah, I agree. Like he looks pretty good on this slate. And one thing that I'll mention is the Colts seem to have had really run heavy game scripts so far this year. The volume for Phillip Rivers has not been there, but the efficiency hasn't been bad. So it's just like the team has been a little bit more run heavy than I was expecting with Rivers as QB, but it's not like so far over the top. It's having them at 44% as a baseline. The tight ends are at 48%. So the Colts, I expect for more pass volume tonight. Now, as far as what affects the rest of the rotation with Hilton coming back, we also have Pittman, who came off the IR a couple weeks ago. And Marcus Johnson was kind of the value play of the day on Sunday. That was a little bit of a disappointment. But the top 3 wideouts in Sunday's game were Pittman, Johnson, and Pascal. Now with Hilton coming back, who do we expect to take the biggest hit?
Yeah, I would imagine Marcus Johnson probably gets sent back to the bench most likely. Maybe he still gets on the field for a few snaps, and he's still, I guess, in contention to get on the field. But mostly, I do think the 3 wide receiver core is pretty solidified as long as Hilton is healthy, which this guy has played through injuries before. I think he should be expected to be on the field for his normal complement of snaps. Would just be Zach Pascal, Michael Pittman, and T.Y. Hilton. I think like I'd lean Pittman maybe a little bit, just maybe anchoring on that draft capital too much, but he has come back and played like not bad. He's getting a decent amount of looks. I think Pittman would be my preferred play out of him and Pascal, with maybe Hilton filtering to the top, because I also think like generally Hilton in the past at least has been like very explosive upside. Maybe he doesn't have that anymore, but I still rely on a pretty strong prior of Hilton in years past to have like high ADOT, high leverage targets. So him, then Pittman, then Pascal. And I don't have a ton of love for Marcus Johnson. I really don't know how much he sees the field. It's also a team that could run out, like they have multiple running backs that could run out in the same snaps, and the same with tight ends. So I think potentially even that squeezes Johnson's volume further.
Yeah, I agree. I think Marcus Johnson as well will be the biggest hit. I think Pascal has had a steady snap count the whole year. So Marcus Johnson didn't play weeks 1 through 3. The rotation was Hilton, Pascal, and Pittman, and Campbell, but he got injured, of course. So now that Hilton is back, expect to see those 3 guys the most. I also got a question in Slack about Michael Harris. I'm not really expecting him to play much, but I saw there was a note that maybe they have some plays planned for him in the RotoWire or whatever. But
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I don't think we can really go beyond wide receiver 4 here. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not even sure. Would he potentially be wide receiver 5? Like, yeah, we can't go beyond wide receiver 4. You can still, I think, comfortably probably slot him in as wide receiver 5. And it would make sense that if like anyone would get on the field, it would be more Marcus Johnson, maybe taking some snaps from Hilton just because he is returning from injury. Yeah, don't have a ton of love outside of like Marcus Johnson is a deep play. I'm probably not going past that. I think there's enough ambiguity that could kind of spread out the ownership that you could just lean heavily on, choose your, like, I don't have a strong lean between Pascal, Pittman, or Hilton, but I think if you did, I'd rather look to just going over the field on them instead of trying to get like maybe like a fancy play syndrome with like the wide receiver 5 on a team that does like run a little bit heavy and are like, they were favored at least early in the game. I don't know, or earlier in the day. Are they still favored, I assume?
Yeah, the Colts are favored by 1. That was an interesting line movement because tight ends were favored at the start. I've noticed that the Colts have underperformed a little bit compared to their Vegas projections. So the money is still coming in on the Colts, though. So whoever's behind these lines is definitely liking the Colts, I think, as a strong team in the NFL. The other thing with the Colts tonight is, there's a lot of interesting elements here, I guess. So Jonathan Taylor has been seeing his workload go down a lot.
Yeah.
Jordan Wilkins has gotten more rushing attempts, and partly maybe due to Jonathan Taylor injury that the coach was citing, but it's maybe that's an excuse for bad play. You never really can tell. But I think it's going to be hard to peg who's going to get the more rushing attempts tonight between Wilkins and Taylor, but I think the edge goes to Wilkins. What do you expect out of this running back rotation?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know, good for Jordan Wilkins. I think it's probably Jordan Wilkins, which is not as fun, I guess, but Jonathan Taylor hasn't been that good, so maybe I shouldn't be so sad to see him go. And it was very convenient. He got fumble 6 on a play, and then they came out after the game, and they're like, man, he was injured. Tough scene to see it. And I was like, sure he was. So, yeah, I think Jordan Wilkins in the past 2 games, 34 to 21 touches. He's also out snapping Taylor, and it's been pretty clean, too. I think Taylor is largely operating as, the 1B at best. Could that completely flip? They spent second-round draft capital on him. He was an incredible prospect. Could that flip at any time? Sure, but I think at this point we do have to believe that if you project one to get more carries, it would be Jordan Wilkins.
Yeah, I agree. I think Wilkins is a safer bet. Then again, sometimes we're wrong. In that San Francisco game, I think everyone was expecting JaMychal Hasty to lead the backfield. Then it was McKinnon. So these situations are volatile, and the teams try not to kind of let you know about what they're planning. So it's hard to really have too strong of a feeling. But I think that Wilkins is probably the most likely thing is that they just kind of continue doing what they have been doing, which is that Wilkins has been the lead back. So the other interesting element is we have Jack Doyle out at tight end, and the other guys at tight end, Trey Burton and Mo Alley Cox, are pretty high target guys, both being targeted on 22% of routes so far this year. I think both are in play tonight. What do you think?
Yeah, both are absolutely in play, and I think both are on the field and just operating as kind of pass-catching tight ends specifically enough that one doesn't get a significant advantage. I know last week Trey Burton, I believe, ran more routes than Mo Alley Cox, despite seeing one fewer target. I believe it was a 4-3 split. So maybe a slight lean towards Trey Burton, but I don't think there's any strong indication one way or the other. Kind of the same thing with a lot of players on this slate, honestly. We have a small sample because they've been so mixed up because of injuries. I give a slight lean to the more recent performer, I guess, which in terms of routes run was Trey Burton. In terms of targets, they were nearly split. So slight lean towards Burton. No strong conviction on either of these guys, though.
I agree. I think that I was expecting Burton to have more of a snap share than he did last week, or at least a route share. But he only ran routes on half the plays when Jack Doyle only ran routes on 23%. Well, Cox was at 40%. So given that Mo Cox is usually the tight end 3, maybe he's going to see more work than you might expect at first glance. So that's definitely something I'm considering in my lineups tonight. Now, No House Advantage, the sponsor of our show, they are a site where you can play DFS contests with player props. And with player props, it can be tough to bet those. A lot of states it's not legal yet, and also maybe you get limited. So playing peer-to-peer instead of against the house is a really good advantage. Plus, playing against Joe Schmo, they probably know a little bit less than a sophisticated billion-dollar company, just to guess. But you pick a few props, you compete in DFS-style tournaments. You can get $20 free if you use the promo code Awesemo, and that's a nice little bankroll booster at No House Advantage. Let's talk a little bit about props. One that you like on No House Advantage we'll start with. What are you looking at tonight?
Yeah, so Marcus Johnson props were hung pretty high. They're hung as if he's going to be either in the mix as the third receiver or straight up the third receiver. I think it's the most likely outcome is that he's essentially the fourth receiver. Sure, he could play an above average role for a fourth receiver, but at best, that's still a pretty minute role. So both his receptions at 2.5 and his receiving yards at 35.5 are pretty clean, easy unders for us. I'll give the lean towards receptions, but I think you really can't go wrong with either of them because those are essentially number 3 receiver numbers. And I think at best, like he could operate as sometimes the number 3. I think the most likely outcome is that he's straight up just the number 4 receiver and doesn't play a lot this game.
Yeah, I noticed on the Sportsbook too, they were loving Marcus Johnson for some reason. And it just shows like the people behind like the props right now aren't really that sharp. And like you can pick off some that are really easy money. And on No House Advantage, they don't change throughout the day. So they're similar to what the Sportsbooks have at the start of the day, but they don't update, so getting those can be even better. And Marcus Johnson's unders, I really like those. The other one I like is they're letting you bet under on Jonathan Taylor rushing touchdowns of 0.5. So basically, if he gets 0 rushing touchdowns, you win that leg of the parlay. And I just think that with 3 guys in the mix to take rushing touchdowns, that seems somewhat unlikely that he will hit one of those. So that's one I like on No House Advantage. Now let's talk about sportsbooks real quick. If you want to check out on the site, we got the NFL prop tool. It's in beta. So that is something that we're really working on to give you sports bets that you can make on these books. And you can go over to OddsShopper, find the best book to bet them on. What are some of the sports books you're liking today?
Yeah, so I saw this on DK Sportsbook. T.Y. Hilton, 34.5 receiving yards. Our projection right now, our projected stat line for him is slightly over 50. And I know it's a little juiced. It's minus 124 on the over. So there is some money already, like obviously picking that. I still think there's a pretty massive edge. Like it's a pretty wide discrepancy between 34.5 and ours is around 51, I believe. So even though it's a little bit of juice to pay, I still think he's getting undervalued for his role. Like I said before, like maybe he's just dusty and can't capitalize on that role. But I tend to believe like if that's the case, he just wouldn't be on the field and he wouldn't be getting those targets. So until the volume goes away, I'm just going to, I guess I'll keep betting these T.Y. Hilton overs.
Nice. I think he's a good guy to bet on as a bounce back. I know a lot of people watching, you're probably like, man, give it up already. T.Y. Hilton is dusty, but we'll give him some love here.
That's what they told us about Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and look how that turned out. It seriously was like 3 or 4 weeks of just racking up these air yards, and I was taking so many L's on him. And finally on the Showdown slate, we got it. And that's what it is. It's like volume over time will eventually equal fantasy points, or if not, they probably just get benched. So right. I believe that.
Yeah, you don't have to overthink it. I mean, each target is worth like a certain amount of yards, and usually for wide receivers, it's somewhere between 6 to 8 yards, depending on how good they are. The Colts are averaging about 7.5. So as you were saying, he has games with 9 targets. That equals probably 65 yards on average. And I think the prop of 34.5 looks pretty tasty. I was going to bet the Marcus Johnson unders, but there's some juice on the under now. So make sure to hit these early in the day. The one that I like is Phillip Rivers over on completions is at 23.5. Now, I think that given they're less of a favorite than they are normally, the Colts, I expect the passing volume to be higher today. And also they've been more run heavy just because of the game script so far this year. So I expect a lot of passing attempts for the Colts today. And their completion percentage, because Phillip Rivers doesn't like air it out too much, 68%. So if I'm doing some math here, 40 times 0.68 is 27. I mean, 40 passing attempts is quite high. I have them for a little bit less than that. But you can see how these numbers add up to a lot more than 23.5 if you're assuming 35 plus attempts. So I like that Phillip Rivers completions over. They really offer you so many different bets to bet on. You can just like pick your spots. It's pretty much like shooting fish in a barrel, in my opinion. But you get limited a little bit quick. So take advantage while you can. All right, Tennessee Titans. Now the Titans are one of the most run-heavy teams in the league. And they also have an explosive passing offense, which is kind of something we've been seeing more in the recent years, like the Ravens as well. They don't pass much, but when they do, they're throwing deep balls. And you've seen A.J. Brown and Corey Davis have numerous good performances this year so far. So it's going to be a question, like, do you want them to target the Titans' run game or the pass game or both? Now, do you lean one way or the other here?
So I think there's a few things competing. One, we've seen, it was like 3 games, I believe, that Corey Davis and AJ Brown played in the same game, because the Titans have kind of been mixed up with who they've been playing every week. And in those first 3 games, it was actually Corey Davis out targeting and out air yarding him, which was interesting. But then we kind of saw the return to normalcy last week, where AJ Brown was clearly the number 1 receiver. Corey Davis, I don't think he even caught one of his 3 targets. I think that should just reaffirm our priors that it's, 3 games of Corey Davis playing over AJ Brown. We have most of last season, I believe, where AJ Brown was the number 1 receiver, and Corey Davis has years of data saying he's probably not that good, at least not a number 1 receiver. So I think if I'm looking to target the Titans passing attack, I'd probably look to AJ Brown. I think your decision comes down to, do you think we can get both Corey Davis and AJ Brown to catch a touchdown? At that point, you're probably, not guaranteed, you're probably looking to a Ryan Tannehill if he spreads it out. Those two have not had they've seemingly traded off good games. It hasn't quite happened for both of them in the same game. So maybe for that reason, you'd look to an AJ Brown. I think you can always target Derrick Henry, especially in a spot where the game is supposed to be close. The Titans aren't really ever, they're a pretty solid team. They're never going to come in as massive underdogs, except they ever play the Chiefs or something. So anytime it is close, I think you can look to Derrick Henry. My only concern is we've actually seen Deonta Foreman, Jeremy McNichols in 2 games that weren't blowouts in either direction get, I want to say combined for 16 carries over the past 2 weeks. So do you lend any credence to the fact that Derrick Henry is actually it's a 2-game sample. It's really small to work with. That's kind of what the NFL is, though. Is there any credence to the fact that Derrick Henry might not be the most used back in the entire NFL? Could he just come down to the rest of the running backs, really?
Well, I think with high volume running backs, the number of carries is something to be looking at. So over the last 6 weeks, Derrick Henry has been between 19 and 23 rushing attempts per game. So the fact is, it looks like they are trying to get him 20 touches a game and maybe limiting his workload a little bit. And that's something we see in the NFL a lot. It's pretty unusual for a guy to be like Derrick Henry was at the start of the year, running 30 times a game. So it is important to keep your expectations moderated. And yet, against the Bears, Derrick Henry really couldn't get much going. So I don't think there's going to be any lower ownership because of that, but he's coming off a bad game. I'm not expecting everyone to go there. I think A.J. Brown was the guy that had the big game on Sunday. So I think Derrick Henry, I'm not going to claim he's sneaky, but he's one of the best captain picks, I would say. But yeah, if you're expecting 30 rushing attempts, maybe not tonight. Now, AJ Brown has been, if you just look at his game log, you're definitely going to roster him. And, you got to be concerned that everyone else is doing that. His average points per game are 20 on the year, which is very high, partly in the back of 6 touchdowns. He's only played 6 games. That's an average of 1 touchdown per game. That is just unlikely to be something that is sustainable. His last 4 games, 23 points, 12 points, 30, 22. And the Colts defense is pretty solid, but better against the run than the pass. So what do you make of A.J. Brown here, given that he's coming off these big games?
Yeah, I kind of agree. And it's difficult because the Titans do just they play efficient. They're doing a lot of play action. I think a lot of pre-snap motion stuff. You should expect them to be above average efficiency. And also they just simply have a good quarterback, which obviously all of this stuff culminates to a team playing at above average efficiency. Shouldn't be too surprising. Tannehill right now, I think, is top 5 in touchdown percent and adjusted yards per attempt. with all that being said, I still think we're seeing like incredibly unsustainable touchdown numbers from AJ Brown. And it's not like he's absolutely dominating this team in targets either. Like I said, Corey Davis was like getting run over him in terms of targets. So it'd be one thing if he was Devontae Adams, like annihilating what we can even perceive as like target share and air yard share numbers. It hasn't been quite to that extent. And this is a team that also doesn't pass a ton, as we talked about, one of the more run heavy teams. So I think AJ Brown could get a lot of like maybe a small bump. I don't think people like at this stage of DFS are wildly reacting to game logs or anything. I think we've kind of moved past that, but he could be getting a small bump in just how efficient he has been versus how owned he should be, because you just can't project this kind of efficiency to continue. He should be an above average efficient player, but scoring a touchdown every game seems quite unlikely to continue through the rest of the year. So I do agree that, I posed the Derrick Henry question to you, but like, I don't care too much if his backups get 4 or 5 carries in a game, because it hasn't really changed his volume a ton. Like, he still remains one of the most used backs. So I do think if I'm looking at just playing like which of the top Titans do I want, I still quite clearly lean Derrick Henry. I don't think AJ Brown is a bad play, but he could potentially be over-owned because of his incredible efficiency.
Yeah, I think AJ Brown's a guy that the sharper the field is, the less owned he will be, because people who are using less information, maybe they're just on the draft screen looking at that 20 points per game. They're like, man, AJ Brown is as good as DK Metcalf, So I think AJ Brown would be very popular tonight. Now, Derrick Henry, he's definitely the superstar on this team. So that is a counteracting force that we're going to see. So it's an interesting dynamic here. I'll be looking to see how this shakes out. Now, one thing the team has been dealing with the past few weeks is a COVID situation. Then I think Adam Humphries got a concussion or something. He's out again. So what have you noticed in Adam Humphries' absence the Titans have been doing here?
Yeah, so Khalif Raymond projects to be the number 3 receiver, but actually, at least last week, I think it was the first time we saw Cameron Batson in a few weeks, but he actually did get some run. I think he basically split these snaps with Khalif Raymond. Raymond does have like the longer standing track record with the team as like a number 4 or 5 receiver, just like being on the active roster. I think Batson at one point was pulled up from the practice squad. So if we're looking to a number, 3 receiver on this team, it would probably be Raymond, but I feel less confident now because we actually do see Batson getting some run. I still think Raymond's super interesting in like the largest field of tournaments. He has I think it's like an 18 average depth of target. Does he even get 1 target? I have no clue. Like, I think you would probably want a game script where they're passing a lot, because if they aren't, what are the odds that his minuscule target share actually converts into a target and then he catches that target? It's not great. So I would probably look to target Raymond specifically in like Ryan Tannehill lineups, because I think the odds of Raymond catching a pass like greatly increase when you consider, or the odds of him like having a good game greatly increase when you consider the fact that his 1 catch could be a long touchdown. It's probably more likely to be a long touchdown than it is like a 1-yard reception, honestly, based on his ADOT. So I think he's like deep interesting, but like live to catch a long touchdown, which is all you need to know for Showdown, I guess.
Yeah, Khalif Raymond, he definitely is a threat to be that guy that could be a difference maker in some of these large field tournaments. His snap count wasn't great last week, but as you mentioned, Batson came in as well. What I noticed here is that the tight ends have been getting a lot more run in Tennessee. Over the last 2 weeks, we've had an average of 1.3 tight ends running routes per passing play. So my conclusion is that the tight ends are running more 2 tight end sets with Adam Humphries out. And I don't know if we can count on that necessarily, but Adam Ferkser saw 60% of snaps running routes. Johnny Smith was at 80%. Both of these guys have been targeted at a really high rate. I'm not expecting Ferkser to be contrarian because he's had some big games this year so far. But if you're looking at tight end too, I mean, Ferkser stands out as a guy that is more reliable than most. So any deep flyers you're looking at on Tennessee?
Yeah, Khalif Raymond would probably be as deep as I go. And like you said, I think maybe on a different slate, we come in and say Berkser would be a bit of a flyer, but he does like every fourth week come in and score a touchdown. So I don't think he's actually that awfully contrarian, like you said, because he has this track record of being like the showdown slate breaker. So I still like him for that reason. Like he saw 6 targets last week, got more targets than Jonnu Smith. I think he's live for that, although that would not be the median projection. Mostly as deep as I would go in terms of the pass catchers would be a Khalif Raymond in the largest tournaments because, like I said, I don't know if he even sees a target this game. It has a lot of upside, that target does, but it's not even a lock to get one target. Berkser is probably the safer of the pseudo punt plays, but he'll also be more owned for that reason.
Definitely, yeah. So Berkser, if you're a little nervous about clicking that, I think he's fine. Now, one thing that we're trying to do, especially this week, is focus more on single entry and 3 max contests because I know a lot of you guys watching just throwing in a few lineups tonight. So we want to really narrow down the choices to what we do if we just had a couple lineups. So first of all, I think in Showdown, I mean, it's kind of a trope that we talk about, you want a story in your lineup, but it is true. There's so much correlation in a single game that it makes it a lot more likely for you to win if there's some narrative that is consistent throughout your lineup. So what would be one angle you might approach this game trying to target specific phases of the game?
Yeah, so I think kind of the obvious one would just be like Titans cover, or at least, cover, win this game. And that would be the ultimate Derrick Henry smash. And the thing about Derrick Henry, which we talk about a lot, is that given his non-existent role in the pass catching game, his touchdowns will all be exclusively shared by himself. He won't be, you don't have to worry about if you play T.Y. Hilton, does Phillip Rivers throw 1 to Hilton and 1 to Pascal, and that puts him in the optimal lineup or optimal captain spot versus a Hilton. Derrick Henry goes off, you've got the right captain. So I like Derrick Henry in that spot, and I think I'd probably run him back with some of the pass catchers on the other side. I think it'll be interesting to see how the pass catching ownership shakes out on the other side because there is no clear-cut number 1 receiver. So I think there's maybe some small edges to be had there. Like we talked about with me, for me, it's probably Hilton just because the volume is there. And I don't care if he's dusty or not. I just buy volume. I only see things in spreadsheets. I don't even know his age.
Yeah, I mean, Dusty, who cares if he's dusty if he's out on the field? He's just kind of getting those targets.
Also, this game is full of dusty players, like Phillip Rivers. Zach Pascal is probably young and dusty. So, yeah.
Definitely. So I think Derrick Henry is a top captain for sure. And if we're targeting that Tennessee is in the lead for a good amount of this game, then he makes a perfect captain. On my top Showdown plays tool, which you can go with the Express Pass. I have him as an 18% chance to be the top captain. Now that's the second highest of any player on the slate. I'll mention my favorite captain in the next lineup here. But who would you want to pair it with Derrick Henry? I mean, he's pretty expensive, so we got to find some value options. And what would you target more Colts players, more Titans players? How would you fill this lineup out?
Yeah, I'm probably, especially in single entry 3 max, not running Derrick Henry 1-5 lineups. I do think, though, Derrick Henry is probably negatively correlated, roughly speaking, to his pass catching options. So I wouldn't necessarily be looking to pay up for an A.J. Brown, and Corey Davis isn't necessarily cheap either. So let's get weird. Let's go with, this could be our kind of pseudo pivot. I don't think he's completely unknown. Anthony Ferguson, because he only needs 1 of, let's say they score 3 touchdowns. Derrick Henry takes 2, Ferguson needs 1 and pays off where, if you're playing Derrick Henry and you're playing A.J. Brown, you need a big game from both of those guys. That really means you just think this game wildly smashes the over. I guess the Titans at least smash their implied team total. I'm not going to, in a single entry, predict such a wild outcome. I'd rather just bet on 1 Ferguson touchdown, which he's on the field, like you said, a decent amount. Got 6 targets last week, and it wouldn't take a lot for him to pay off his salary.
Nice. Yeah, I think Ferguson makes a nice value option with Henry. I'll throw out the Titans defense. I mean, not an exciting matchup by any means versus Indianapolis, but Rivers' interception rate has been very high this year. A little bit fluky, but I think that the chance that they take one to the house isn't bad. And if you're playing Henry dominates, maybe they can pick up some points with the low Colts total. The other guy, Gostkowski, I guess, the kicker, where if we're not expecting a lot of passing volume, maybe we're just playing that they get a couple of field goals, a couple of rushing touchdowns. So I think What about the Colts? You got to choose at least one Colts player. Who would you
I have to choose. We got to go T.Y. Hilton here, especially if we're saying they, I can't talk them up all night and say we're not going T.Y. Hilton. So I'll roll with Hilton here. And I think even obviously, I mean, you have to, but I think even if you play the Titans defense, you're fine with running out one of the at least mid-price. They don't really have any super high price guys. So you're fine with running out one of these mid-price Colts guys. For me, that's Hilton.
I like Hilton. I think if we're projecting a lot of Henry rushing attempts, we got to think the Colts throw at a higher rate. One guy you could target as well is Hines, being the guy that's going to be in for passing downs. If they're down, maybe you could rack up a lot of PPR points. So I think there's a lot of different ways you could go. Any receiver is pretty solid in this lineup. I'll talk about my favorite captain play here. I have a feeling the chat is going to hate this one, but that's why he's not going to be super high owned. But Phillip Rivers. Now, Phillip Rivers doesn't run at all, which is a big negative for captains in Showdown because the receivers could rack up a much bigger score. But the thing I like about Rivers is there are 6 targets that he's distributing it between, and the odds are a lot better that he's the highest scoring player, given that no one player has a dominating target share. So I think Phillip Rivers at captain, and then you maybe take 2 or 3 pass catchers in the flex. I mean, there's so many, but you could go with Trey Burton. You could go with Ali Cox, Hilton, Pittman, Pascal. Those would be my 5 that I go with. Would you be interested in Rivers at captain today? I know you're not big on the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think many of the reasons I'm not big on quarterbacks is one, not in the NFL. Actually, we get a lot of rushing quarterbacks. He is not one of them. But like you said, they have nobody really dominating targets. It's been such a mix of different guys. They have a bunch of guys bunched between the 30 and 50 target range, and they have 5 or 6 guys in that range. And none of them are above 50, and obviously none of them below 30. Some of that is just simply due to the injury stuff. They have just a mix of guys who none of them can really have at least really dominated targets. So I think you could absolutely run Hines, Hilton, and Burton, or whomever. Pick 3. I don't have a strong preference between any of them. But if you're running all of those, that likely means that there you go. Phillip Rivers at captain. I don't hate it. And it's simply because he checks one of the 2 quarterback boxes that I think are basically the most important quarterback boxes when you look at captaining them versus their receivers, is they either run or they don't have a number 1 or a top 2 set of receivers. Hilton has a top 5, or sorry, Rivers has a top 5 set of receivers. So he checks that box with an emphatic check.
Yes. So I think maybe that's something that we don't normally recommend that you could run out there tonight is Rivers QB, a captain. And I know he's not a very popular player right now, so I don't think he'll be overly popular. We do have most of the captain ownership being distributed to the Titans players here, so that's something to consider as well. Probably because the Colts, there is no one guy that is a star player right now, so it's really tough to pick someone at captain. Now let's talk about FanDuel real quick. What kind of approach would you do for single entry on FanDuel?
Yeah, I think Rivers becomes an even better play because you're generally just targeting quarterbacks. And now we've kind of eliminated the AJ Brown is not a bad option on DraftKings by any means, even if we have said we're more interested in Henry or Rivers over him. He kind of does become a much lesser option when you look at FanDuel scoring. So for me, Rivers continues to be an increasingly good option, and Derrick Henry kind of just the obvious one. I think you do have to start considering though, any love for Jonathan Taylor or Jordan Wilkins, simply because the FanDuel scoring does favor the running backs. And although we don't know what's going to happen between these 2 guys, the field doesn't know either. And I think that is going to really have them making, the decision by indecision where they say, I can't pick either one of these. Who knows what happens? But that's why I think is the upside there. Who knows what happens? What if the guy I pick gets a ton of carries? That makes him a great play on FanDuel specifically. So I still lean Wilkins, unfortunately. I want to see more Jonathan Taylor. I like Jonathan Taylor, but the Colts are telling us it's Jordan Wilkins. So I think Jordan Wilkins would be a sneaky deep captain play or MVP play, I guess.
I like it. Yeah, I think that Taylor is probably the more hyped up player. So if we're leaning towards Wilkins anyway, then he makes a nice play. And I do agree. One thing I think is important to note here is that it might be a hot hand situation where if one of them is playing well, they're going to play more of the snaps. That just increases the variance. which is ideal in a GPP. So I think that Wilkins makes a nice captain play or MVP on FanDuel. I guess we talked a little bit about our favorite captains already. So are there any more guys you consider at captain tonight?
I think we probably named off most of them. I mean, like, you can consider a guy like Corey Davis. I think maybe one guy I feel comfortable fading is Jonnu Smith because he's running like largely just as hot as AJ Brown on touchdowns, but he doesn't have like this like crazy target upside. He doesn't have these like super long play upside. So like even the argument for fading AJ Brown just applies stronger to a Jonnu Smith. You could play Corey Davis, but I think I'm not like super interested in that. I just don't think it's something I gain a ton of like leverage versus the field by playing. We haven't talked a ton about Ryan Tannehill, who sort of checks the boxes in that he's thrown like touchdowns to a handful of different guys. Like you get guys like Ferguson in the mix. We could, get a long Khalif Raymond touchdown. I think he's certainly a viable play. I think the field just recognizes that. Whereas like with Rivers, I think Rivers he's just less popular than he should be a captain potentially. Not that I think he's like some incredible smash play, but the distribution looks so good on his side in terms of who he throws it to. And I don't think the field recognizes how important that is. Whereas Tannehill, I think people understand that he's good. So I think it's fine to be with the field. I don't have any strong lean towards him. Any love for Tannehill from you specifically?
Yeah, I think, he's solid. As you mentioned, there's a few different targets that works in his favor. Now, the Titans are a more run-heavy team, so I'm not sure the volume is as bankable as Rivers, which is, as I'm saying it sounds wrong because Rivers had a lot of games where he hasn't really thrown much. And I think Tannehill's solid, though. I mean, I have him as a 17% chance of being the top scoring play. I just updated it, so if you're looking at this tool, make sure to refresh, which is the second highest on the slate. Or third highest. So definitely have some Tannehill lineups captain. I'll throw out some love to the defense, the Titans defense in particular, because I think that I don't think they're going to be popular at captain. And defenses has been on a cold streak. They do have that 20 point plus upside if the situation is break right. Given that the Titans defense has averaged 5 points per game so far, I don't think people will be expecting that. And it'll happen one of these showdown slates. I I hope, because I've been going all out on them. Okay, so now let's talk about some lineup construction tips. So if we're talking about game scripts, I think the quarterbacks are the key pieces here because they don't score points independently unless they're rushing. Neither of these guys really rush a ton. So if you have a quarterback at captain or a quarterback in the flex, how would that affect the rest of your choices?
I think arguably with Tannehill, you could still play just one pass catcher because he does have some games with a few rushes. Like he's not drawing dead to rush for a touchdown or like 20 to 30 yards. I can't really envision a scenario with Phillip Rivers where you're not playing at a minimum of two of his pass catchers, because if he gets there, obviously like his receivers are going to catch a lot of passes, yards, touchdowns. And in that case, if only one of them gets there, they probably get there hypothetically. Just when I say get there, I just mean score a lot of points. Essentially, they get there over him. They become the optimal captain. So I think at a minimum, you should be playing two of Rivers' pass catching options. I think you could argue that Tannehill is potentially just a single stack guy. I'm still favoring double Tannehill stacks. Two of the guys like Ferks or Corey Davis. Ferks or Brown. And with Rivers, I think you can go upwards of you can go three at least. So.
Yeah, if you have Tannehill at captain, I think you probably want to, because if you just pick one, then the chances if Tannehill has a big game and none of the other receivers have big games enough to be in the winning lineup, then that guy in the lineup with the Tannehill may outscore him more. So you do want that more balanced distribution with high volume. So if we have Tannehill captain, I definitely think I wasn't sure if you're talking about just in captain or in the flex. So if in the flex, I think that just having one is totally a good strategy here. But yeah, with Rivers, he's thrown it around so much, we can mix it up a lot. So I think in flex, you don't want to target too many guys, because if he's throwing touchdowns to three dudes, he may be the captain. So there's definitely some nuance to these lineups. Maybe you can play the shootout narrative too, where both teams have the ball when they're trailing and keep scoring, and then maybe you load up on both passing offenses. That is a game script that is successful a good amount in the NFL. So something interesting you can think of. Now, one of my favorite players today is Blankenship for the Colts. So I think he's hit 17 field goals so far, and he's played in 8 games, so that's more than 2 per game, averaging 9.5 fantasy points per game. Now, if he hits over 9.5, I think there's a good chance he'll be in the winning lineup. Do you want to target kicker more in this game, given that Blankenship is getting field goals at a higher volume? What are you feeling about him?
Yeah, so his team has the slight edge in implied team total, and they are, I believe the Colts are 6th in the NFL in field goal attempts per game. So yeah, I actually do think if I'm targeting one of them, it's definitely Rodrigo Blankenship. And I don't think he's a bad play at all. I think, especially in the context of having a lot of guys who could score middle ranges of points, like we get a pretty even distribution where you're getting 4 for 40 and 3 for 50 from Hilton and a Pascal. At that point, you get Rodrigo Blankenship going for 13 points potentially, and he outscores those guys. So I think he's actually very much in the mix, specifically because this is a slate where we could see such high distributions, specifically on the Colts side, but I think generally just in the game environment, we could see distributions that favor a kicker having a good enough game to get there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm getting trolled hard in the chat. They're like, man, why are you guys talking about kickers? I mean, but let me bring this back to the projections here, because I think this is the best point I can make here, is that I have Blankenship projected for 9.6 points. That's higher than any player on the Colts other than Hilton, Hines, and Taylor, and Rivers, of course. So higher than Pittman, higher than Pascal, and of course, we got Burden and Moai Cox. I have Blankenship scoring more points than those guys as well. So, man, it's a situation where the projections are telling me, man, Blankenship is the play. Now, kickers aren't as high variance as these guys, but I have Blankenship as being part of the top 6 scoring players about 25% of the time, and that's better odds than any of those guys I named that are more expensive. So, Blankenship's one of my favorite players tonight. And you guys in the chat can suck it. Nah, just kidding. But if you're trolling me because you don't like kickers, maybe you'll learn your lesson tonight. It's funny because Gostkowski, I don't really have much love for. I'm looking a lot at the props for making my kicker picks. Even though the teams are projected for about the same number of points, Indianapolis, the Sportsbooks like them for 2 field goals. Tennessee at 1.3 based on my adjusted odds. So there's a huge gap there. All right, Sean said you suck it. All right. Well, agree to disagree here on the kickers. All right. So let's let's talk about some final thoughts. I'll take some questions in the chat here. Rep says Blankenship more than Gostkowski. Yes. Ryan says Blankenship over Wilkins. Now, at the price, I would say I have more love for Blankenship, but I do like Wilkins. I feel like if you're just looking at his average points per game of 5.7, he's not going to stand out. I don't know if a lot of people playing these tournaments are really looking that deep into it. He's only 5,400. So would you go Wilkins or Blankenship?
Yeah, I would say for the price, given the context of the price, I would go Blankenship. I mean, if I have more money, I'd probably look to Wilkins, but it's pretty similar between the two. And we haven't seen a ton of Wilkins pass catching upside either. So you kind of need either a long run, which I mean, it's probably a touchdown anyway. So I think you get similar, not that dissimilar projections, more variance from Wilkins and at a higher price. So I guess a slight lean towards Blankenship.
Nice. Yeah, I think this one is a game script question to me because Blankenship is kind of plug and play. It doesn't really matter what the game script is. He'll be in the mix for being in the lineup. where Wilkins, he's not really a threat at receiving. And actually, one of my favorite props is the Wilkins under. He only ran routes on 21% of plays last week, compared to Taylor at 28% and Hines at 40%. So I think Blankenship is going to score enough points to be in the winning lineup a little bit more. But I really like Wilkins. I think as a captain play, I much prefer Wilkins, of course. But the overall odds of him hitting may be lower. And one thing I noticed on FanDuel, I'll mention this real quick because I give odds that each player will be the highest scorer on this tool. And on DraftKings, I've Blankenship at 1.7%, on FanDuel at 1.9%. But I kind of am starting to think that kicker on FanDuel at MVP may be not crazy because you don't get the bonuses, you don't get the PPR bonus. So the points are exactly the same on DraftKings and FanDuel for kicker, but the odds that they're going to be the highest score are higher on FanDuel. So talk me out of it, please, because I feel like I'm just going to lose money consistently with these kicker captains.
I mean, in the context of FanDuel, I mean, there's like, it literally just has to be like mathematically true, right? That there is no way they are not better MVP plays because they are the only position not getting any negative changes from the scoring. So yes, in that respect, 100% true. In the respect of am I playing them at captain or at MVP? Probably not unless I'm playing in the largest of large field tournaments. I know a lot of the people who are watching are probably playing, the single entry stuff. So I wouldn't go there in much of the single entry. I do think, though, they're going to hit a few times every season, I guess. We had one recently, I believe. So it's not completely insane. It's simply just playing the game theory of how can I build a unique and not drawing dead lineup. And they're certainly not drawing dead. Like, they're absolutely not drawing dead. And the scoring even, skews slightly towards them as well. So I won't talk you off the ledge. Just I will tell you that you're standing over a ledge, and you'll probably fall off of it a lot.
Yeah, so this is a low percentage play. It's only for that Sunday Million tournament on FanDuel. But everyone in chat is saying, kicker is the highest score once a year, and there are 256 games in the NFL per year. There are like 120,000 people in this tournament. So if the odds are truly 1 in 256, that's not horrible in a tournament that's top heavy. So I think guys in the chat are saying they've had enough kicker talk. So I've noticed our watching numbers are dropping the more minutes we're talking about kicker. So let's see. I'm looking for questions here. Michael says, Khalif Raymond, can we stop talking about kickers? So how you're saying you like Khalif Raymond as a boom bust. How is that translating to your lineups?
Yeah, it's only happening in the largest of tournaments simply because he's kind of that same play where it hits like, I don't know, once in 200, 300 times, because he is really like, you are probably maybe less than 50-50 to get a target out of him. I guess because they're underdogs here, maybe, you would argue that is at least a more likely outcome that they pass a little more than usual. But yeah, you're not awfully likely to get more than 2 targets even. And the odds of him connecting on them because they are such high variance targets aren't that great. So I think he's simply just the largest field tournaments, like maybe, the largest of single entry is like 30, 40 plus thousand people. So even in those contests, I think he is viable, but just expect that like you're going to have to play a lot of Khalif Raymonds before Khalif Raymond pays off for you.
Yeah, I think, not a crazy play tonight. We know he's going to be in the game, playing a decent amount. So Khalif Raymond, I think if you're playing those large field tournaments, not bad. But I don't have particular confidence in him over other punt plays. Corey Davis narrative. Honestly, I wasn't really following that. So what is this narrative? Did he play for the Colts? I can't even remember.
No, he didn't play for the Colts. He didn't go to school near Indianapolis. He was one of the Michigan schools. Is it his birthday? I think there's a player with their birthday, honestly, but I don't think it was him. I thought it was a Colts player.
No, it's not him. So maybe in chat, let us know what this Corey Davis narrative is.
Is the narrative just that he's bad?
I don't know, man. Like, he's been good this year. So
he has been good. I like him.
Yeah. But Ryan's bringing it up. He's I forgot about this. His
Oh
brother.
no!
Yeah.
Oh my God! No! As soon as you said that, well, this isn't fun anymore.
Yeah, sorry about joking about that, but yeah. So maybe the thing is, like with wide receiver, it's hard to buy into narratives because they're not throwing the ball. You know, they're not controlling their destiny. So, what any reason?
No, for those in the chat, I believe it was a family member who unfortunately passed.
Davis.
Right? It was you had a family member that passed, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you just buy into the narrative is what I'm asking.
Yeah. Sorry. I was just trying to make sure I had this right. That's what I thought it was. No, not really. And like, yeah, I think there are probably times in the grand scheme of DFS, sports and the intersection of life that narratives actually do make sense. Like maybe this is confirmation bias. Like we can look back at the Kobe game, and that was like the most, like literally the narrative. There's no, like in my heart of hearts, there's no way that obviously wasn't a narrative game. But like you said, how much control does he even get over the narrative? It seems like as a wide receiver, it would be so minimal. And I think even in a sport where like the quarterback is not the only, like he's not getting to shoot shots. He's shooting throws to other players. Even if it was a quarterback narrative, you're still relying on him to act on that narrative, throw to his receivers, complete to his receivers, and those receivers like yards after the catch and find the end zone. So even on top of that, it's not as simple as like taking the shots. It's so much more that needs to happen. So specifically in football, narrative would probably be like this would be maybe the sport with like the least ability for narrative to matter. Maybe baseball probably has just as little ability from I hardly know anything about baseball, but I would imagine there's just as little ability. Basketball actually has some ability to be narrative driven. Maybe soccer could too, because you're just shooting. It's a shooting sport essentially.
Yeah. I think that the narrative isn't gonna factor in either. Nick Y has a good question here, saying Henry or Tannehill at flex. What is your lead there?
I mean, I think it just depends on your lineup. This one is like, if you already have AJ Brown in your lineup, I'm almost certainly going with Tannehill. Whereas if you don't have any Titans, like if you just had, like if you had Titans defense, I would just play Derrick Henry. So this is more of a question of like, what does your lineup have correlated with the lineup? Derrick Henry correlates with like no one outside of defense or just the cheaper plays because they don't need to, like they can both coexist. Whereas like Tannehill makes more sense with like, maybe on the other side, a running back, or on his own team, just the pass catcher. So I guess I'll go with Derrick Henry, but my answer doesn't really matter too much. It's more about the lineup. And I hope, given the person's lineup, they can answer that question for themselves now that I've kind of explained my thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It really depends on the rest of the players in there, if there's a correlation with the other players. Now, I feel like quarterbacks do score more consistently than running backs, especially Henry, because a lot of that is the rushing touchdowns and game script. So if it's all things equal, I'd probably put in Tannehill. AJ Brown or Corey Davis, FanDuel GPP. Well, I think Corey Davis is a lot less popular than AJ Brown as far as overall, star rankings, I would say. So maybe like if you think they're close to equal, then you go to Corey Davis. Do you think Corey Davis would be a lot lower owned at captain?
Yeah, I'd imagine he'd be way lower owned. And I think maybe there's a chance that things are closer to equal than people perceive because, AJ Brown just keeps like ramming in touchdowns. Whereas, like I said earlier, Corey Davis in the first three games they played together, saw more targets and more air yards. Do I think that that's going to be the case going forward? No. But do I think any game has the potential for that to be the case? Yeah. And I think it's probably more likely than people anticipate. So in large tournaments, I think he'd be a good pivot off of AJ Brown. Not like a ton of confidence that he ends up doing better than AJ Brown, but I guess I probably have more confidence that he does than the field. So I'd act on that by putting him in MVP.
Nice. Yeah, I was kind of thinking Corey Davis, but now I'm looking at my data here and I'm leaning more to AJ Brown now because I'm for more than twice as much chance of being the highest scoring player. But honestly, like I'm second guessing these projected captain ownerships of both of them because I do know AJ Brown being on the hot streak. I feel like he'll be that pass catcher that everyone's going to click. I don't know if the narrative is really something people are going to be building lineups on. Will Harris play from Indiana? What is this about?
I assume he went to Indiana or maybe they just No, maybe they just misspelled Indianapolis. And if they're just asking, will he play? My answer would be no, probably not.
Yeah, we mentioned DeMichael Harris briefly. He had a good game last week, but I feel like he's going to be squeezed out of the rotation now that both Pittman and Hilton were back. So I'm pretty negative on guys that are not Pittman or Pascal as far as the Colts receivers, of course, in Hilton. All right, guys, so we just laughed. Any final thoughts about tonight's slate?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I'm really curious to see where ownership shakes out on everyone because there's so much ambiguity. And I'm not sure, it'll be a one-game sample, so it won't really tell us much about how the public reacts to these situations. But I'm more just curious, will T.Y. Hilton having more name brand value than Pascal and Pittman, will that make him more owned? Or will people see his consistent bad performances and go under-owned? And I won't extrapolate it too much, but I will at least think about that going forward. The same thing with AJ Brown. Will he get a ton of ownership, or at least more than we expect, because he's been so hot? Or does the field continue to recognize these things, which the field gets sharper every year? So that's kind of my biggest question, honestly, because I have something on most of the players in this game. I'm more just curious to see how the field approaches this game.
Yeah, definitely. I think Hilton versus AJ Brown will be an interesting one because Hilton has been cold as ice and AJ Brown has been hot as heck. So I do think AJ Brown is a much safer pick, but I think the ownership gap is going to be enormous tonight. So that'll be interesting to watch. Guys, if you're watching, you're not already a member of Awesemo, you can get all of our Showdown content for the Express Pass. That's $3.95 a week. And we have a lot of free content on this YouTube channel, so subscribe and check out the site for more free articles. Thanks for No House Advantage. They're sponsoring us. If you like betting props and you want to play against Joe Schmo instead of some sharp guys behind these companies, then No House Advantage is the place to play. Use the promo code Awesemo for $20 free. And finally, thanks for supporting the site, the stream. Really appreciate you guys, and hopefully we get some good luck tonight. If you are having success, let everyone know. Hit us up in the Slack channel on Twitter. Everyone likes seeing that. Inspires us all to keep grinding. So, all right, guys, good luck, and hopefully we get a good game tonight.